The desert world of Tatooine had never known mercy. It was a planet of brutal mathematics, two suns that burned without apology, sand that swallowed the weak, and a society built on the architecture of ownership. Slaves wore transmitters beneath their skin like punctuation marks at the end of sentences that read, "You belong to someone else." Children grew up counting the stars, not with wonder, but with longing, measuring the distance between themselves and freedom in light years. They would never travel. Shmi Skywalker had learned to stop counting. She had learned instead to find her sky in small things, the way Anakin's eyes caught the twin sunset and turned copper and gold, the way he laughed when a sand beetle navigated his palm, the way he slept, with his fingers curled as though already reaching for something magnificent. She had built her peace out of these moments, the way a desert creature builds shelter, carefully, close to the ground, never too high. That was why, when the light came, she didn't know what to do with it. It began as a streak, a pale blue-white line drawn across the pre-dawn sky above. Mos Espa, silent as a prayer and twice as unexpected. The other slaves stirring in the early dark dismissed it as a shooting star, turned over, went back to sleep. But Shmi stood in the doorway of their small quarters and watched it decelerate, actually slow down, in a way that no natural object in any sky she had ever studied was capable of doing. It slowed, and then it stopped, and then it sat in the black above Tatooine's atmosphere like a second moon, enormous and gray and impossibly precise, its running lights blinking in patient rhythm. And then the transmitter beneath her skin went silent. Not malfunctioned, not glitched, silent. The faint background hum she had lived with so long she had ceased to hear it, the constant low frequency, reminder that she was property, that her blood contained a leash, simply stopped, like a held breath released, like a sentence finally, mercifully finished. She pressed her fingers to the spot on her arm where the device sat beneath the skin and felt nothing but her own pulse. Mom. Anakin was 9 years old and already the most perceptive being she had ever known. He stood behind her in the doorway, sleep-rumpled, eyes fixed on the sky, and his face held an expression she had never seen on him before. Not wonder, not excitement, something older, something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "Mom, do you feel that?" She didn't ask what he meant. She felt it too, a warmth in the air that had nothing to do with the approaching suns, a sense of something vast and deliberate hovering at the edge of perception, as though the universe had leaned down close and whispered a single word into the sand. Here, if you've ever wondered what happens when something from beyond all known stars reaches down into a galaxy far, far away and simply gives, not conquers, not studies, not interferes with careful diplomatic protocol, but gives, the way a parent places something precious into a child's hands without conditions or explanation, then this is that story. This is the morning the USS Constellation, a Constitution-class starship of the United Federation of Planets, NCC 1017, appeared in orbit above Tatooine with no crew aboard, its systems fully operational, its armory intact, its medical bay humming, its computer intelligence patient and waiting. This is the morning 2 slaves woke up free without anyone asking permission first. Subscribe if you want to see more stories where the galaxy's most impossible questions get answered. Drop in the comments the name of any character you'd want to see arrive in a galaxy far, far away. May the Force be with you. By mid-morning, Mos Espa was in controlled chaos. The object in orbit was visible to the naked eye now that the suns had risen, a dark silhouette transiting slowly across Tatooine's upper atmosphere, too large to be any local craft, too structured to be debris. The hut's communication channels were burning. Every sensor array that Jabba's palace could muster was pointed upward, generating readings that made the technicians uncomfortable in ways they couldn't immediately articulate. The energy signature was unlike anything in the Hutt clan's considerable database. No ion drives, no repulsor lift emissions on approach. Whatever had brought that vessel here had left no trace in real space that their instruments could detect. In the Mos Espa slave quarters, Anakin Skywalker had already built a receiver. He hadn't meant to. He'd been trying to understand the signal, a complex, layered transmission cycling on frequencies he'd never encountered, pouring down from the orbiting ship in what his instincts kept Insisting was a greeting. He'd pulled components from 3 different broken datapads, a salvaged power coupling from a dead pod racer, and a piece of wire he'd been saving for a project that now felt suddenly unimportant. The device sat on his workbench and hummed. The signal resolved into something that made him go very still. It was a voice, synthetic but warm, precise but not cold, speaking in basic with an accent he didn't recognize, endlessly patient in its repetition. This is the Federation Starship constellation. Automated greeting protocol active. All life signs aboard registered. Crew complement 2. Bioskin complete. Slave control devices neutralized. Welcome. Anakin looked at the device in his hands. Then he looked at his mother. Then he looked at the sky. Mom, he said, very quietly. I think someone gave us a starship. The transporter beam was the color of sunlight through water. Anakin had read about energy-based transportation in exactly 0 books, because he had access to exactly 0 books that contained such information. And yet when the pale golden column of light materialized in the center of their quarters and the humming in the air reached a frequency that made his back teeth ache, he understood instinctively what it was. Not from knowledge, from something older than knowledge, something that lived in the space between his heartbeats and recognized patterns before his mind had finished processing them. The Force, though he had no name for it yet, had always worked that way. The column dissolved and left behind 2 small metallic discs on the floor, comm badges, though he wouldn't know that word for another hour, and a single line of text on a display panel that had not been there moments before, projected from a small device the transporter had deposited alongside them. The text read, "Press to establish uplink. The ship is waiting." Shmi picked up one of the badges. It was lighter than it looked, warm from transit, and its surface caught the morning light with the quiet confidence of something made to last. She turned it over in her fingers and felt nothing threatening in it, which was remarkable because in her experience everything that arrived uninvited on Tatooine was threatening. She looked at her son, who was already pressing the second badge to his tunic with the focused intensity of a child who has decided that whatever happens next is going to be magnificent. Anakin, it's okay, Mom. He said it with the absolute certainty of someone who had access to information she didn't, which was impossible, and yet, I can feel it. The ship, it's like, he paused, searching. It's like it's already decided we're safe. She pressed her own badge to her chest. The clasp engaged with a soft, decisive click. The voice came immediately, that same warm synthetic tone from his receiver, but clearer now, filling the small room without echoing, as though it understood the space it was entering. Uplink established. Good morning. I am the constellation's LCAR's computer intelligence, operating on automated caretaker protocol. You are currently designated as the vessel's primary residence. All ship systems are available to you. Shall I begin orientation? Yes, Anakin said, before his mother could speak. The display panel, the small device the transporter had delivered, expanded. Not physically. The air itself became a screen, a holographic interface projecting schematics, deck plans, system readouts in soft blue light that painted Anakin's face with the color of deep water. He stepped toward it the way other children stepped toward fires, drawn by warmth and the absolute conviction that this particular flame would not burn him. Shmi watched her son's eyes move across the schematics and felt something shift in her chest. She had seen him look at his podracer engine components with focus. She had seen him look at broken droids with concentration. She had never seen him look at anything the way he was looking at this, with a kind of quiet homecoming, as though the ship's systems were a language he had always spoken but never been given a text to read from. The Constellation is a Constitution-class Federation starship, the computer said, cycling through images as it spoke. Length, 289 meters. 17 decks. Warp drive capable of speeds exceeding light by a factor of 8 under optimal conditions. Phaser banks, fully charged. Photon torpedoes, complement of 47. Deflector shields, fully operational. Medical bay, Deck 7, fully stocked. Replicator systems, online. Current crew complement, 2. Shmi said softly. Confirmed. Bioskin registers 2 human life signs. You are the crew. She sat down on the edge of her sleeping mat because her legs made a quiet and reasonable case for it. She was a slave, had been a slave since before Anakin was born, since before she had learned to think of herself in terms that didn't include the weight of someone else's ownership. She repaired equipment, cooked meals, spoke carefully and moved carefully and hoped carefully. She was not a Starship captain. She was not anything the universe had ever aimed its attention at directly. And yet, the transmitter beneath her skin was silent, had been silent since before dawn. She pressed her fingers to the spot again. That habitual checking gesture she performed 10,000 times, and felt nothing but her own blood moving. "Can you take us up there?" Anakin asked the air. "To the ship? Transporter systems are available. Two-person transit to the main bridge is possible at your request. Caution, departure from the planet's surface may attract attention from local monitoring systems." "It's already attracting attention," Shmi said. She had heard the distant sound of Mos Espas emergency channels crackling through their neighbors' comm unit for the past hour. Whatever Q had placed in orbit above Tatooine was not going unnoticed. The Hutts had eyes everywhere and patience for exactly nothing that threatened their control. "Mom." Anakin turned from the holographic display and looked at her with that expression she had no name for, the one that was older than 9 years, older than their time on Tatooine, older possibly than either of them could account for. "We have to go up. If we stay down here, they'll come for us. Gardella's people. Or Jabba's. They'll figure out the transmitters are dead, and they'll come." He was right. She hated that he was right. She hated more that a 9-year-old boy had to be right about things like this. She stood up. She smoothed her tunic. She looked at the display panel floating in blue light in the middle of their quarters, and then at the twin suns angling their first serious heat through the small window. And she made the decision, the way she made all her decisions on Tatooine, by calculating which direction held the most life. "Computer," she said. "Yes?" "Take us up." The sunlight through water came again. The quarters emptied, and 2 former slaves materialized on the bridge of a starship that had crossed dimensions to find them, standing in the soft hum of Federation technology, with all of Tatooine turning slowly beneath the view screen like a secret finally told. Anakin walked directly to the helm console. He didn't hesitate. He placed both hands on its surface, and the entire board lit up, every system, every readout, every dormant function blazing to life simultaneously in a cascade of gold and blue. And the computer said something it had never said to anyone in its operational history. "Helm control recognized. Interface adapting. Hello, Anakin." The first transmission from Jabba's palace arrived 47 minutes after sunrise. It came through on every available frequency simultaneously, which was the Hutt way of communicating urgency. Not a single focus channel, but a wall of sound. A declaration rather than a request. Structured to feel like weather rather than communication. Something you endured rather than responded to. The constellation's computer intercepted it, translated it from Huttese with clinical efficiency, and displayed the text on the main view screen in calm Federation typeface that somehow made Jabba's words even more absurd by contrast. "This vessel is in Hutt-controlled space. Identify yourself or be destroyed. The slaves SHMI and Anakin Skywalker are property of the Hutt clan and are to be returned immediately. Failure to comply will result in total annihilation." Anakin read it twice, his hands still resting on the helm console. Then he looked at his mother. "He said total annihilation," Anakin observed. "I can read," Shmi said. "Does he have anything that could actually—" "No," the computer said, anticipating the question with what Anakin was already beginning to recognize as its particular brand of helpfulness. Sensors register 6 Hutt-affiliated patrol craft in low orbit, bearing 227 Mark 14. Vessel classes, 2 modified Ubrikian gunships, 3 light freighters with retrofitted laser cannons, 1 Bespin-class transport repurposed as a command vessel. Combined firepower, insufficient to penetrate Constellation's deflector shields at current charge levels. Probability of hull damage, 0.003%. "So we're safe," Anakin said. "From their weapons, yes. However, they are currently transmitting to additional Hutt clan assets across the Outer Rim. Reinforcement vessels estimated arrival 14 to 18 standard hours. Additionally, ground-based communications suggest bounty hunters are being contracted in Mos Espa, Anchorhead, and Bestine. A number of parties are being offered significant reward for. The computer paused in a way that felt almost delicate. For the return of Hutt property. Shmi closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When she opened them, she was already moving toward what the computer had identified during orientation as the tactical station. Because if she was going to live on a starship, she was going to understand the tactical station. She was a woman who had survived Tatooine for decades through the disciplined practice of understanding every system she inhabited. A Federation warship was simply a larger and more complicated system. "Show me what they're doing on the ground," she said. The view screen shifted. Sensors powerful enough to track individual biosigns from orbit focused on Mos Espa, rendering the city in false color. Thermal imaging, a wash of orange and red. Bodies moving through blue-shadowed streets. The slave quarters district was already showing increased activity. She could see the distinctive heat signatures of armed figures moving in, organized patterns toward the block where their quarters had been. Hutt enforcers, perhaps a dozen of them, finding an empty room and the ghost of a transporter beam and the dead silence of 2 neutralized slave transmitters. "They know we're gone," Anakin said. They knew the moment the transmitters went silent. Shmi studied the display. They've been preparing since before dawn. They just needed to confirm it. This was the calculus of slavery that outsiders never understood. The system's first response to freedom wasn't negotiation. It wasn't legal process. It was muscle and momentum, the immediate physical reassertion of control before the idea of liberty could spread to anyone else watching. The Hutt clan's power over the Outer Rim depended entirely on the unquestioned assumption that escape was impossible. One ship in orbit carrying 2 freed slaves wasn't just a personal loss. It was a philosophical catastrophe. Anakin had understood this at approximately the same moment his mother had, which was why he had already been at the helm console for the past hour, learning everything the computer would teach him. He had learned quickly, faster than quickly. The LCAR's interface was designed for trained Starfleet officers with years of academy education, and a 9-year-old desert child with no formal schooling was navigating its secondary systems with the fluid confidence of someone reading in their native language. The computer had noted this in its logs with the Federation equivalent of bewilderment. A series of flagged entries that simply read, "Adaptation rate, anomalous." Cross-referencing. What the computer was cross-referencing, and what it was finding, it had not yet shared. But the helm board glowed under Anakin's hands like it was glad to be touched. "Computer," Anakin said, "can we communicate with those ships out there? Not respond to Jabba's transmission. Actually communicate, like talk to whoever's piloting them. Direct channel to individual vessels is possible, yes. Can we make them see us? Like, can we put an image on their screens? Visual communication is standard Federation protocol, yes." Anakin thought for a moment. He was 9 years old and had grown up in the shadow of beings who used fear as architecture, who built their entire world out of the assumption that smaller creatures would do as they were told because the alternative was pain. He had grown up watching that architecture and understanding, in the wordless way he understood most things, exactly where its load-bearing walls were. Fear required the unknown. The moment you showed someone exactly what they were dealing with, you removed the most powerful component of the threat. "Put me on their screens," he said. "All of them at once." Shmi looked at him sharply. "Anakin, I know what I'm doing, Mom." He said it gently, not arrogantly. He said it the way he said things when the knowing came from somewhere deeper than thought. "They need to see that it's us. Just us. 2 people. Because right now they're imagining something worse. And scared people make bad decisions." She considered this. Her 9-year-old son had just articulated a principle of conflict, de-escalation that most seasoned diplomats spent careers learning. "Computer," she said, "open a channel. All vessels. Channel open." Anakin straightened. On 6 patrol craft screens simultaneously, a boy appeared, thin, sandy-haired, wearing a borrowed Starfleet comm badge on a desert-worn tunic, standing on a bridge that dwarfed him and somehow made him look larger for it. His expression was calm. His eyes were the color of Tatooine dust and twice as certain. My name is Anakin Skywalker, he said clearly. I used to be Watto's slave. My mother and I are aboard this ship now. We're not coming back down. We're not going to hurt anyone who doesn't try to hurt us first. But I want you to understand something. He paused, and something moved behind. His eyes that none of the pilots watching could name, but all of them felt. This ship has 47 photon torpedoes. I know where Jabba's palace is. I know where Gardulla's compound is. I know where every hut structure within sensor range of this vessel is located. Another pause. I don't want to use any of that, but I will protect my mother. On 6 screens, 6 pilots said nothing. The patrol craft held their positions, but none of them fired. The Force had always spoken to Anakin in the language of machines. Other children on Tatooine dreamed of water, of rain, of rivers, of the impossible luxury of swimming in something that wasn't sand. Anakin dreamed of engines. He dreamed of the precise, mechanical poetry of a hyperdrive motivator, cycling through ignition sequence, of the way a perfectly tuned repulsor lift created a harmonic frequency you could feel in your sternum before you heard it with your ears. He dreamed of systems, interconnected, elegant, each component serving the whole with a purpose so clear it bordered on devotion. He had always assumed this was simply how his mind worked. A talent, a preference, something to be grateful for in a life that offered limited options for gratitude. Standing at the constellations. Helm console in the 4th hour. After their arrival, with Tatooine turning beneath them and 6 Hut patrol craft maintaining a cautious distance off the port bow, Anakin began to understand that what he experienced was something categorically different from talent. The ship spoke to him, not in words, not in the synthetic warmth of the Elkar's computer voice, which was its own kind of communication and one he was already deeply fond of. This was something underneath the computer, underneath the hardware, underneath the measurable and cataloged systems of Federation engineering. It was the ship's living quality, the thing that made the constellation more than the sum of its components. And it moved through the helm console into his hands like current, through a conductor, carrying information in a form that bypassed his conscious mind entirely and arrived as pure knowing. He knew the shield frequency before he checked the readout. He knew the phaser bank charge levels without consulting the tactical station. He knew, with a certainty that made his hands tremble slightly, that the warp core in engineering on Deck 7 had a minor plasma conduit, variance that the computer hadn't flagged yet because it was 0.3% outside normal tolerance, and the automated systems considered it negligible. It was not negligible. It would become a problem in approximately 11 hours if not corrected. Computer, he said quietly, there's a variance in the port plasma conduit on Deck 7. Junction B7. Can you run a diagnostic? A pause of perhaps 2 seconds, brief by human standards. An eternity by Elkar's processing speeds. Running diagnostic on plasma conduit junction B7, Deck 7. Another pause. Confirmed. Variance of 0.31% detected. Automated systems had not flagged for attention. Flagging now. Recommend manual inspection within 10 standard hours. Query. How did you identify this issue without running a diagnostic? Anakin looked at his hands on the console. I felt it, he said. Clarify. Felt. Like, the ship told me. Not in words. He searched for language adequate to the experience and found the vocabulary of a 9-year-old desert mechanic straining at its limits. Like when you put your hand on an engine and you can tell from the vibration what's wrong with it before you open the casing. Except bigger. The whole ship. I can feel the whole ship. The computer processed this for what was, by its standards, an unusually long time. This capability is not consistent with human sensory parameters as recorded in Federation medical databases. Cross-referencing bioscan data. A longer pause. Anakin Skywalker. Bioscan conducted on transporter arrival flagged an anomalous biological marker. Designation in Federation database. None. Closest comparable phenomenon in ship's library computer. References in xenobiological records to Force-sensitive beings within this galactic region. Midichlorian count recorded during bioscan. 27,700 per cell. The number meant nothing to Anakin. He had never heard the word midichlorian, but something in the way the computer said it, with that particular quality of careful Precision it reserved for data points outside its standard reference frames made the hair on his arms stand up. What does that mean? He asked. It means, the computer said, with what Anakin could have sworn was a tone of genuine wonder, filtering through its synthetic neutrality, that you are interacting with this vessel's systems through a mechanism that Federation science does not currently have the instruments to measure. You are, in the most technically accurate sense available to me, flying this ship with something other than your hands. In the modified freighter bearing down on them through Tatooine's outer orbital plane, Qui-Gon Jinn stood at the cockpit viewport, with his hands clasped behind his back and his heart doing something complicated and involuntary in his chest. He had been diverted here by a disturbance in the Force so profound it had interrupted his meditation in hyperspace, like a stone dropped into still water, not a violent disruption, not a dark side surge, but something of such staggering magnitude that his connection to the living Force had simply reoriented itself toward it the way a plant reorients toward light. He had expected many things. A Sith artifact, a vergence, an ancient Force nexus awakened by some geological event. He had not expected a Federation Starship in orbit carrying a midi-chlorian count that made every reading he had taken in 30 years of Jedi service look like background noise. Master, said Obi-Wan Kenobi from the pilot's seat, studying the sensor readout, with the expression of a man who had learned to trust his master's instincts while reserving the right to find them deeply inconvenient. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Yes, Padawan, Qui-Gon said quietly. 27,700 midi-chlorians. Yes. Yes. Obi-Wan looked at the ship hanging in orbit above the desert world, at its running lights blinking patient and steady, at the two small life signs inside it, at the number on his screen that shouldn't exist. What do we do? He asked. Qui-Gon watched the constellation turn slowly against the stars with the particular quality of something that had arrived exactly where it intended to be. We introduce ourselves, he said. Qui-Gon Jinn had walked into Hutt cantinas, Sith temples, and the private chambers of senators who wanted him dead. He had negotiated with crime lords, reasoned with fanatics, and once talked a rogue battle droid out of destroying a populated space station. Through a combination of Jedi calm and extraordinary patience, he was not, by any reasonable measure, a man who was easily unsettled. The transporter beam unsettled him completely. It wasn't the discomfort, there was none, which was itself unsettling. It wasn't the speed or the light, or the sensation of his molecules being disassembled and reassembled across a distance that should have required a shuttle and a docking bay. It was the complete absence of any Force warning. Every time Qui-Gon had ever been transported anywhere against his will or by unfamiliar means, the Force had offered at least a whisper of caution. This time there was nothing, not because the Force was absent, but because it was entirely unconcerned, as though the transporter beam and everything that had sent it were so fundamentally harmless that the living Force hadn't bothered to mention it. He materialized on the constellations bridge with his hand on his lightsaber and his heart rate elevated, and a 9-year-old boy looking at him with patient, copper-colored eyes. You can let go of your weapon, Anakin said. I told you, you're not in danger. Qui-Gon released his lightsaber hilt. He looked around the bridge, at the clean Federation lines of it, the blue-lit consoles, the vast view screen showing Tatooine's ochre curve below them, and then back at the boy standing at the helm console as though he'd been born to it. Obi-Wan materialized beside him a moment later, took in the bridge, the boy, the woman at the tactical station watching them with measured calm, and the 6 Hutt patrol craft visible on the view screen maintaining their cautious distance, and arrived at the expression of a man who has learned that Qui-Gon's detours always lead somewhere extraordinary and who has not yet decided whether to be grateful or exhausted by this. Master, Obi-Wan said carefully, this ship is not in any registry I've ever accessed. No, Qui-Gon agreed. It wouldn't be. It transported us aboard without our consent. I consented, Anakin said. On your behalf. The computer confirmed you weren't a threat. He paused, reconsidering. The computer confirmed one of you wasn't a threat. The Force told me about the other one. Obi-Wan looked at Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon looked at Anakin. Something moved in the older Jedi's expression, that particular quality of recognition. that he wore when the Force showed him something. It had been preparing him for. Without his knowledge. "My name is Qui-Gon Jinn," he said. "I'm a Jedi Master. This is my Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi." "I know what Jedi are," Anakin said. There was no hostility in it, and no particular reverence either. He said it the way he might say he knew what hyperdrive motivators were, as a category of thing. He had filed away as relevant information without having strong feelings about. "Shmi Skywalker, my mother." He gestured toward the tactical station. "And I'm Anakin." Shmi studied the two Jedi with the unhurried assessment of a woman who had learned to read people the way her son read machines. Quickly, accurately, and with particular attention to what they weren't saying. The older one she trusted immediately, which surprised her. Trust was not something she distributed quickly, but there was a quality to Qui-Gon Jinn that the Force apparently transmitted even to those without formal training, a rootedness, a genuine interest in what was true rather than what was convenient, that read as safe in some deep register beneath conscious evaluation. The younger one she reserved judgment on. He was talented, clearly, disciplined, but he wore his discipline the way some people wore armor, comprehensively, with everything important protected underneath. "You felt the disturbance," Shmi said to Qui-Gon. "Not a question. The entire Jedi Order felt something," Qui-Gon said carefully. "I was close enough to investigate." He moved toward the helm station, slowly, with the deliberate, non-threatening movement of a man who spent a great deal of his life around beings who needed him to demonstrate he wasn't a danger. He stopped a few feet from Anakin and looked at him the way he might look at a star he'd been told existed, but had never seen, with the specific wonder of confirmation. "May I?" He gestured toward Anakin's wrist, indicating a bioscan he could conduct through touch. Anakin held out his arm without hesitation. Qui-Gon wrapped his hand around the boy's wrist and closed his eyes. The bridge went quiet. Obi-Wan watched his master's face and saw something pass across it that he had seen perhaps 3 times in their years together. A look of absolute stillness, as though the man behind the expression had stepped back from it to make room for something larger. Qui-Gon opened his eyes. "Computer," he said, directing the word at the air, with the instinctive adaptability of a man who had encountered enough alien technology to know that all of it listened. "What is this boy's midichlorian count?" 27,700 per cell, the computer said, the highest recorded in ship's sensor history. For context, Federation xenobiological records indicate the average for Force-sensitive beings in this galactic region falls between 7,000 and 13,000 per cell. Jedi Masters typically register between 10,000 and 17,000. Obi-Wan sat down in the nearest available chair. He did this not from weakness, but from the practical recognition that standing was an affectation. At this particular moment. "That's impossible," he said. "The computer seems fairly confident," Anakin said. "There are prophecies," Qui-Gon said quietly, still looking at Anakin, "within Jedi tradition. Ancient texts. They speak of one who would bring balance to the Force, who would be born of no father, of the will of the Force itself." He paused. "The Council has debated their meaning for generations." "I've heard of them," Shmi said. Her voice was entirely level. She had had 9 years to make her peace with the fact that her son was something the universe had done on purpose. Qui-Gon turned to her with an expression of complete respect. "You've known since before he was born." She met the Jedi Master's eyes steadily. "And I want to be very clear about something. Master Jinn, whatever Anakin is, whatever the Force made him, he is my son first. He is a person first. Any conversation about his future involves him and involves me. And nothing is decided without that." Qui-Gon bowed his head slightly. "I would have it no other way." "The Council might feel differently," Obi-Wan said, not unkindly. He was looking at his master, with the expression of a Padawan who could see exactly where this was going and was already preparing himself for the turbulence of bringing it before 12 Jedi Masters, who had strong opinions about prophecy and stronger opinions about exceptions to their rules. "The Council," Qui-Gon said, with the particular serenity of a man who had spent decades finding the Council's strong opinions less persuasive than the Force's direct communications, will need to be told, but they don't need to be obeyed. The view screen chimed again. A new transmission from Jabba's palace. This one on a tighter frequency, directed not at the ship's broadcast systems, but at a specific encrypted channel. The kind of channel that suggested Jabba had stopped talking to the constellation and started talking to someone else about it. Incoming encoded transmission, the computer said. Recipient, unregistered comm address. Outer rim routing. Message content after decryption. Ship in orbit above Tatooine. Unknown origin. 2 escaped slaves aboard. 1 child. Extraordinary force signature detected by multiple sources. Acquisition bounty, 1 million credits. Secondary interest expressed by. The computer paused. The routing on the secondary interest has been obfuscated through 7 relay points. However, the encryption signature is consistent with Sith-affiliated communication protocols found in the ship's xenobiological threat database. The bridge was very quiet. Qui-Gon's hand moved back to his lightsaber, not gripping it, just resting there, the way a person rests their hand on the shoulder of something they trust. They know about Anakin, Obi-Wan said. They knew the moment the Force moved, Qui-Gon replied. Darkness always notices when a new light appears. Anakin was already back at the helm console, his hands moving across its surface, with the fluid certainty of someone who had stopped being surprised by what he knew and started simply using it. The ship's sensors were already reorienting, scanning the outer rim trade corridors with new focus, searching for the particular energy signature that the Force was telling him. Quietly, insistently, in the language of cold certainty, was already on its way. Computer, he said, begin active sensor sweep. Long range. I'm looking for a single vessel. Fast. No standard transponder. Signal. He paused, feeling for the right descriptor. Something that moves like a predator. Initiating sweep. He looked at Qui-Gon over his shoulder. Someone's coming, he said. Someone bad. Darth Maul traveled through hyperspace. The way he did everything. With absolute economy of motion and absolute certainty of purpose. He sat in the center of his Sith infiltrator's meditation chamber. Legs crossed, eyes closed. Breathing in the slow, deliberate rhythm his master had taught him before. He had teeth to bite with, or words to name what he was being made into. The dark side moved through him like cold water through stone, not warming him, not comforting him, but filling every available space with a pressure that felt like readiness. Like potential violence held at absolute zero, waiting for the temperature to change. Darth Sidious had been precise in his instructions. Unusual, that precision, his master typically dealt in architectures, in long-game arrangements where individual pieces moved according to principles rather than specific orders. But this situation had demanded specificity because it was, by any calculation Sidious applied to it, an anomaly. Anomalies were the only thing that genuinely concerned him. The boy, Sidious had said, his voice carrying that quality of silk over something sharp, is not to be harmed. Not yet. His potential is significant. Bring him to me. The mother is irrelevant. The ship is irrelevant. The Jedi, if present, are to be eliminated. Maul had not asked why. He never asked why. Why was a question for beings who doubted. And doubt was a luxury his master had burned out of him before. He was old enough to know it was gone. But he had felt it, the disturbance. Even in hyperspace. Even through the dimensional insulation of faster-than-light travel. The force pulse from whatever had appeared above Tatooine had reached him like a shockwave from a detonation of impossible scale. He had sat with it for a long time, pressing against its edges with his consciousness the way a tongue finds a wound, trying to understand its character. It was not dark. That was the most disturbing thing. It was not light either, in the pure docile sense that the Jedi assigned to that word. It was simply vast, an ocean of potential with no shore in any direction he could sense. Something the Force had poured itself into without reservation, and which now sat above a desert slave world broadcasting its existence to every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy like a beacon that didn't know it was one. He had recognized, in that first moment of contact, that the source of the disturbance was a child. He had also recognized something else, something he would never have admitted to his master. Something that sat in the cold center of his chest like a coal that hadn't decided yet whether to die or catch. A quality in that Force signature that reminded him, in the most distant and theoretical way, of what he himself might have been if things had gone differently in the very earliest years of his life. He did not dwell on this. He was Darth Maul. He did not dwell on anything. The infiltrator dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Tatooine's system with the precise timing his master demanded. And Maul opened his eyes and looked at his sensors and revised his operational parameters immediately. The Jedi were already there. He identified Qui-Gon Jinn's vessel docked at the Constellation's secondary docking port, a connection that shouldn't have been possible given the disparity in docking systems between a Federation Starship and a standard Republic freighter, but which the Constellation had apparently achieved through some form of adaptive interface that his instruments couldn't fully categorize. The ship itself was unlike anything in Sith archives, which were considerably more comprehensive than Jedi archives regarding unusual technology. Its energy signature suggested weapons capability that he assigned appropriate respect to without fear. Fear was another luxury. He reviewed the tactical situation with the dispassionate clarity his training had built. In him were other beings kept their feelings. One Federation starship of unknown capability. One Jedi Master, one Padawan. Two escaped slaves. A child whose force potential would have made Sidious weep if Sidious had been the weeping kind. 6 Hutt patrol craft maintaining distance, irrelevant. Cowards by definition. Motivated by credits rather than conviction, useful only as noise. Standard approach would be to dock under a false transponder signal and infiltrate the vessel. Eliminate the Jedi. Extract the boy. Depart before the Hutts found their courage. But the Force was doing something unusual. It was pushing against his plan with a quality of resistance he hadn't encountered before, not warning him away exactly, but suggesting with considerable insistence that standard approach was going to produce non-standard results. The Force rarely lied. Even the dark side carried its own form of truth, and the truth it was currently offering was, this child is not what you think, and this ship is not what you can categorize, and the Jedi Master inside it is exactly as dangerous as you know him to be, and also more so, because he is already prepared. Maul activated his calm. I am in the system, he said. Good, Sidious replied through encrypted channels. The situation has developed faster than anticipated. The Jedi presence complicates extraction. I can eliminate the Jedi. Qui-Gon Jinn is a complication, not an obstacle. However, a pause that Maul recognized as his master recalculating. The ship concerns me. Its capabilities are unknown. Do not engage it directly. Find another way in. Maul studied the sensor readout. The Constellation's shields were at full power. Deflector technology completely outside his reference database, which meant he couldn't reliably estimate its resistance to his weapons. The ship's phaser banks were charged. 47 photon torpedoes in the launcher bay, according to the energy signatures he was reading. And then the ship found him. The sensor sweep hit his infiltrator with a precision that told him immediately the targeting system behind it was not operating at standard automated parameters. Someone was directing it. Someone who had found his exact position despite his stealth systems, despite his dampened transponder, despite every countermeasure the Sith had developed over generations of hiding in plain sight. His comm unit chimed. An incoming signal on a frequency his instruments required 3 full seconds to decode, which was 3 seconds longer than any system had ever taken to reach him. He accepted it. The face on his screen was a boy's face. Thin, sandy-haired, wearing a small metallic badge on a worn tunic. Standing on a bridge that should have been far beyond his years to occupy. His eyes were the color of desert, sand, and they looked at Maul across the sensor distance. Between them with an expression that contained something Maul had never seen, directed at him before. Not fear, not aggression, not the Jedi serenity that was really just disciplined suppression of fear. Sadness. The boy looked at him with the specific sadness of someone who sees a thing clearly and wishes the seeing were different. I know you're out there, Anakin said. I can feel what you are. A pause. I can feel what you used to be too, before you became what you are now. Another pause, longer. You don't have to do this. Maul stared at the screen. In 30 years of training, in every mission his master had sent him on, in every confrontation with Jedi and criminals, and desperate beings making their last bad choice, no one had ever said anything remotely like that to him. His entire existence had been built on the premise that he was a weapon, and weapons did not receive invitations to reconsider. His hand moved toward the controls. His mission was clear. His master had given him a specific objective, and he was built to execute objectives without the friction of doubt. But the force pressed against him again, harder this time, insistent, carrying a quality that in a being with less discipline might have been called a plea. He closed the channel. He sat in the dark of his meditation chamber for a very long time. Then he began to run calculations that had nothing to do with extraction routes or combat approaches. Calculations about what happened to weapons when the hand that made them began, very slowly, to lose its grip. Shmi Skywalker had never wanted power. She had wanted water that didn't need to be rationed. She had wanted her son to sleep through the night without flinching at sounds that might be HUD enforcers. She had wanted mornings that belonged to her rather than to whoever's name was stamped on the ownership document that defined her legal existence. These were the dimensions of her ambition, not small, given the world she inhabited, but modest by any galactic standard. Power, in her experience, was what other people had and used against you. But she had been sitting at the Constellation's tactical station for 6 hours now, and the Elkar's interface had been teaching her with the patient thoroughness of a system designed to bring any sufficiently motivated being up to operational competency. And somewhere in the 4th hour she had stopped thinking of the console as something she was learning to use and started thinking of it as something she was responsible for. The distinction mattered. It changed the quality of attention she brought to it. The Sith vessel hasn't moved in 40 minutes, she said, studying the long-range sensor display. It's sitting at the edge of our effective phaser range and not doing anything. Kagan stood at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, watching the view screen with the expression of a man who was having a very complicated conversation with the Force and preferred not to be interrupted. It's waiting, he said. For what? For us to make a mistake. Or, he paused, and something shifted in his expression. Or it's waiting for something else entirely. Obi-Wan was at the science station, which he had occupied with the methodical efficiency of a Padawan who responded to uncertainty by learning everything available about his immediate environment. He had spent the past 2 hours absorbing as much Federation technical documentation as the Elkar system would offer him, and the experience had left him with the particular expression of someone who has discovered that the universe is significantly larger than their previous model had accounted for. The ship's database, he said, not looking up from the console, contains records of over 1,000 distinct civilizations, warp-capable species, diplomatic contacts, historical records. He paused. They've never encountered the Force. The Force has encountered them, Kagan said quietly. It encounters everything. Anakin was in engineering. He had gone there 40 minutes ago, telling his mother he needed to fix the plasma conduit variants before it became a real problem. And Shmi had let him go because she recognized the particular quality of focus in his eyes. The look he got when a mechanical problem was pulling at him with enough insistence that keeping him away from it would cost more energy than it was worth. But it wasn't just the conduit. Engineering on Deck 7 was the heart of the constellation, and Anakin had understood this from the moment the transporter deposited them on the bridge, understood it the way he understood the central bearing in a podracer engine, the component around which everything else oriented itself. Being here, in the actual physical space where the warp core pulsed its slow blue light into the surrounding chamber, was different from interfacing with it through the helm console. It was like the difference between reading about rain and standing in it. The warp core spoke to him in a register below sound. He had his hands on the plasma conduit junction, a tool he'd never seen before today, held with the confidence of a child who had been fixing things since before he could read, and he was working with the careful attention he brought to all mechanical problems while simultaneously doing something else, something he had no name for, something that involved the Force flowing through his hands into the conduit and the conduit responding with a warmth that had nothing to do with the plasma flowing through it. He was, without knowing the word for it, attuning to the ship. Plasma conduit variants corrected, the computer said softly. The engineering speakers carried its voice differently than the bridge, quieter, more intimate, as though it understood that this space required a different register. Correction method not consistent with standard engineering protocols. Query, you used. I know, Anakin said. It felt wrong and I made it feel right. The warp core efficiency has increased by 0.7% following your adjustment. This is not a result that standard manual correction would produce. He sat back on his heels and looked at the core. Its blue light moved in his eyes like deep water. Can I ask you something? He said to the computer. Always. Q, the one who sent this ship here. He had found the name in the ship's logs. A single entry, time-stamped at the exact moment of the constellation's dimensional transit. Reading simply, Q, because someone should. What is he? The computer took its time. Asterisk Federation records contain significant documentation of the entity designated. Q, he is a member of a non-corporeal species of effectively omnipotent beings. His interactions with Federation personnel have been characterized by asterisk a pause that felt almost editorial. Unpredictability. He tests. He observes. He occasionally intervenes. His motivations are rarely transparent at the moment of action and become clear, if at all, only in retrospect. Why would he send this ship here? Why us? Unknown. However, another pause. A review of Q's documented behavioral patterns suggests that his interventions, however chaotic they appear, tend to occur at points of significant potential, moments where small changes produce large consequences. He appears to be interested in possibility. Anakin thought about this. In the blue light of the warp core, it felt significant in a way he couldn't articulate. The Force works like that too, he said quietly. He stood, replacing the tool in the engineering kit with the neatness of long habit, and was about to return to the bridge when the ship did something unexpected. Every light on Deck 7 shifted, simultaneously from standard white to a deep amber, the same amber, he would later learn, as the Federation's yellow alert status. His comm badge activated before he could reach it. Anakin. His mother's voice carried the particular quality of calm she deployed when calm was the most important thing available. Come back to the bridge. What's happening? The Sith vessel is moving. A pause. But that's not the immediate problem. He was already running for the turbolift. The immediate problem, he discovered 30 seconds later, was that the Hutt patrol craft had received reinforcements. While everyone's attention had been on Darth Maul's infiltrator, Jabba had not been idle during the 6 hours since Anakin's transmission to his pilots. He had been assembling, with the patient thoroughness of a crime lord who had not maintained his empire for centuries by responding to provocations emotionally. The sensor display now showed not 6 patrol craft, but 23, arranged in a rough sphere around the constellation, at a distance that suggested they had been very carefully briefed on what a photon torpedo could do to an unshielded vessel, and descending from high orbit in a heavy transport that bore the markings of Gardulla the Hutt's personal fleet came something that the sensors, flagged with a designation Anakin didn't recognize. Computer, he said, sliding into the helm seat. What is that? Asterisk the vessel in descent is deploying what appears to be a modified slave control broadcasting system. Planetary range, transmission capability. It is. Asterisk the computer paused with what was becoming its characteristic quality of careful delivery before difficult information. It is transmitting a reactivation signal on the frequency of the slave transmitters. Your device is neutralized this morning. Effective range encompasses all of Mos Espa and the surrounding settlements. The bridge went very quiet. It's going to reactivate the transmitters, Obi-Wan said. In every slave on the planet. As a demonstration, Kagan said, and his voice carried a coldness Anakin hadn't heard in it before, not anger exactly, but the temperature of a man who has just been shown the precise nature of what he is dealing with. They're telling us that they can't take the ship, so they'll take the planet instead. Comply, or they hurt everyone below. Shmi was already at the tactical station, her hands moving with a competence that had nothing performative about it. She had been learning this console for 6 hours with the focused urgency of someone who had understood from the beginning that learning it was not academic. Her eyes moved across the readouts with the speed of a woman who had spent decades processing threat assessments with limited information and no margin for error. She found what she was looking for. Computer, she said, and her voice was the steadiest thing on the bridge. The broadcasting vessel. If we targeted its transmission array specifically, not the whole ship, just the array, what would that require? A precision phaser strike at 0.003% of standard beam width. Targeting solution would need to account for the vessel's descent, trajectory, and calculate the array's position within a moving target. A pause. Degree of targeting difficulty. Significant. Recommended operator. Someone with substantial tactical experience. Shmi looked at the targeting console. She thought about the 9 years she had spent watching her son fix engines in the dark, about the patience that required, about how patience was really just another word for the willingness to do a hard thing carefully. I can do it, she said. Kagan looked at her. You've been at that station for 6 hours. I know. She settled into the seat with the quiet finality of someone sitting down to a task they have already completed in their mind. Locked targeting on the transmission array. Narrow beam. Minimum power. Targeting locked, the computer said, awaiting firing authorization. She looked at her son. Anakin met her eyes, said nothing, gave her the smallest nod. Not permission, because she didn't need his permission, but acknowledgement. The nod of one person recognizing another person doing something that matters. Shmi turned back to the console. Fire, she said. The phaser beam lasted 0.4 seconds. It was the color of concentrated sunlight, a narrow thread of coherent energy so precisely calibrated that it passed through the gap between Gardulla's transport and its escort craft without triggering either vessel's proximity sensors, traveled the intervening distance in a straight line that accounted for orbital mechanics, atmospheric refraction, and the transport's descent trajectory, and struck the slave control broadcasting array with the surgical accuracy of something that had been aimed not by a targeting computer alone, but by a woman who had spent 9 years learning exactly how much precision a desperate situation required. The array went dark. The reactivation signal died on Tatooine's surface, in Mos Espa and the surrounding settlements. Several thousand slave transmitters remained silent. Nobody on the bridge said anything for a full 3 seconds. Then the computer spoke. Transmission array destroyed. Collateral damage to surrounding vessel systems, 0. Slave control reactivation signal, terminated. Slaves affected, none. A pause that felt, even from a synthetic intelligence, like something adjacent to admiration. Shot accuracy, 99.997%. Obi-Wan Kenobi looked at Shmi Skywalker with an expression that had passed through surprise and come out somewhere in the vicinity of profound respect. You've never fired a phaser before today, he said. I've never had a reason to, Shmi said. She was already back to studying her sensor display, because the shot had bought them something, but not everything. And the difference between those two things was the difference between a pause and a solution. The Hutt fleet is moving. They're pulling the transport back to high orbit and reforming the encirclement pattern. Kagan had his eyes closed. He had been standing at the center of the bridge since the yellow alert had sounded, and Anakin had noticed, with the particular attention he brought to beings who carried unusual amounts of force energy, that the Jedi Master wasn't simply standing. He was listening, conducting some form of internal negotiation with the living force that required stillness, the way a delicate instrument required a stable surface. The Sith, Kagan said without opening his eyes. Where is he now? The Sith infiltrator has altered course, the computer said. Asterisk, it is no longer on an intercept trajectory. Current heading takes it, asterisk, a pause, away from Tatooine, bearing 227 Mark 14, retreating to the outer system. Obi-Wan frowned. He's withdrawing? He was given a choice, Anakin said from the helm console. He said it quietly, looking at the sensor display that showed the infiltrator's retreating signature. The sadness was back in his voice. That quality of clear seeing that wished itself otherwise. I don't know if he took it, but he was given one. Kagan opened his eyes. He looked at Anakin for a long moment with an expression that had given up trying to categorize what it was seeing and had settled instead into simple witness, the posture of a Jedi Master who had learned that some things were better observed than analyzed. The Hutt fleet won't wait indefinitely, he said. They've tried direct intimidation and lost their broadcasting capability. They'll try something else, something we haven't anticipated. They already are, Shmi said. Computer, Show the master what you flagged 30 seconds ago. Sensors detect 6 vessels detaching from the main hut formation. Configuration consistent with boarding craft, short range. Heavy hulled, designed to clamp onto a larger vessel's hull and breach it. Current trajectory suggests targeting of the constellation's lower decks. Estimated contact with hull, 17 minutes. Obi-Wan was immediately on his feet. They're going to try to board us. With what? Anakin asked. His hands were already moving across the helm console, pulling up schematics of the constellations. Lower hull with the focused efficiency of someone who had been mentally preparing for this contingency since the Hot Fleet first reformed. This ship has 17 decks. We have 4 people, 3 fighters and a child, Obi-Wan said with the reflexive precision of someone who had learned to assess combat resources accurately. I'm not a child, Anakin said, without heat. I'm the one flying the ship. Obi-Wan opened his mouth, reconsidered, and closed it again. Kagan moved to stand beside Anakin at the helm. What are you thinking? He asked, and the question carried none of the condescension that adults typically embedded in that question when directing it at 9-year-olds. He asked it the way he might ask a fellow Jedi Master, as a genuine request for strategic input from a source he had decided to trust. Anakin appreciated this more than he could say. The boarding craft need to clamp to our hull to breach it, he said. If the hull isn't where they think it is when they get there, we move, Kagan said. Orbital adjustment. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make their approach vectors wrong and force them to recalculate. Anakin pulled up the relevant navigation display. Every time they recalculate, we adjust again. We can keep doing this for. He consulted the computer. How long can we maintain maneuvering thrusters without affecting shield power? Indefinitely at current power allocation. Warp core efficiency increase following your engineering adjustment provides sufficient surplus energy to maintain both shields and maneuvering thrusters at full capacity simultaneously. Obi-Wan looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man reminding himself that the Force worked in ways that transcended conventional expectation. So we dance, Shmi said. We dance, Anakin confirmed. He looked at Kagan. But that only solves the boarding problem. There are still 23 ships out there. More coming. Eventually they'll try something the maneuvering thrusters can't answer. Or, Obi-Wan said slowly, the tactical section of his mind, engaging with the problem the way it had been trained to. We changed the terms of the engagement entirely. Everyone looked at him. He had the slightly uncomfortable expression of a man whose idea had outrun his confidence in it. The Hutts want the ship neutralized because it threatens their control. Their control depends on the slave economy. The slave economy depends on the transmitters. He paused. The transmitters are already neutralized on the surface. But there are other slave populations in this system. Other settlements. Other ships in Hutt service carrying beings who are still. He stopped. The silence that followed was the kind that happened when an idea revealed its own full scope in a room. Computer, Shmi said, and her voice had a quality Anakin hadn't heard in it before, a resonance. A weight, as though she had been carrying something for 9 years and had just found a surface large enough to set it down on. What is the effective range of our transporter system for neutralizing slave control devices? Asterisk standard transporter range, 40,000 kilometers. However, asterisk the computer paused. The slave control devices use a relatively simple subspace frequency for monitoring and detonation. Our sensor array can identify them at considerably greater range. If we were to adapt our comm system to broadcast a neutralization signal on that frequency, can we do that? Anakin asked. With appropriate modifications to the secondary comm array, yes. The modification would require approximately 40 minutes of engineering work. However, another pause. The signal, once broadcast, could not be limited to this system. Given Tatooine's position on the Outer Rim comm relay network, the neutralization frequency would propagate along existing relay infrastructure to connected systems. The bridge processed this. How many systems are connected to Tatooine's relay network? Kagan asked quietly. In this region of the Outer Rim, 47 systems. Estimated slave population with active control devices within relay range. Several 100,000. Obi-Wan sat down again. It was becoming a habit. If we do that, he said carefully, we don't just free the slaves in this system. We don't just threaten Hut control of Tatooine. He looked at Shmi. We collapse the economic foundation of the entire Hut Outer Rim operation. Every transmitter in 47 systems goes silent simultaneously. Yes, Shmi said. The political consequences would be. Yes, Shmi said again. Her voice was completely level. The voice of a woman who had done the calculation and found the answer and was now simply waiting for everyone else to finish arriving at it. I know what it would mean. I've known what it would mean since the computer told us. She looked at her son. I needed to say it out loud so everyone in this room understood the choice we're making. Anakin looked at his mother. He thought about every morning she had pressed her fingers to the spot on her arm where her own transmitter sat. He thought about every slave in Mos Espa. He thought about 47 systems and several 100,000 people who had gone asleep last night still wearing their leashes. How long did you say the modification takes? He asked the computer. 40 minutes. He stood up from the helm console. I'll be in engineering, he said. The 40 minutes felt like 40 years and passed like 40 seconds. Simultaneously, which was the particular quality of time and moments that mattered. Anakin worked with both hands and something beyond hands. The force flowing through him into the secondary comm array's guts with the focused intensity of water finding the exact shape of the space available to it. The modification was technically complex by any standard engineering assessment, involving the precise recalibration of 17 distinct frequency modulators and the rerouting of power from 3 secondary systems to boost the broadcast signal to relay network strength. The LCAR's manual estimated it as a 4-hour job for a trained Starfleet engineer. Anakin did it in 38 minutes. He didn't think about this particularly. He thought about the work, and the work thought about him in return. And between them, they arrived at solutions that neither could have reached independently. The plasma conduit junction hummed its approval as he worked around it. The warp core's blue light filled the chamber with the quality of something paying attention. Modification complete, the computer said, with what Anakin had entirely stopped pretending wasn't warmth. Secondary comm array recalibrated to slave control neutralization frequency. Relay network integration confirmed. Broadcast range, 47 connected systems. Awaiting authorization. He pressed his comm badge. Mom, I hear you. Her voice came back immediately. She had been at the tactical station the entire time, managing the hull dance with a precision that had kept all 6 boarding craft recalculating their approach vectors for 38 minutes without a single successful clamp. The Hut pilots were, by this point, almost certainly furious in the particular way of beings who keep reaching for something that keeps not being where it was. Are you ready? Ready. The authorization has to come from you. A pause. Brief. The length of a breath taken and released with intention. Why? She asked. Anakin thought about how to say what he knew. Because Q sent this ship to us, he said. Not to me. To both of us. And because, he paused, feeling for the right words. With the same instinct he used to feel for the right component in a dark engine bay. Because you've been carrying this longer than I have. You should be the one to put it down. The silence that followed was longer than the previous one. Long enough that Obi-Wan's voice came through the comm badge with careful neutrality. The Hutt fleet is showing signs of a new formation. Something coordinated. We may be running short of. Computer, Shmi said. Her voice had the quality of a door opening. Yes. Broadcast the signal. Broadcasting. The constellation's secondary comm array. Opened like a flower and sent a single precise frequency along 47 relay pathways simultaneously, traveling at the speed of light through subspace relay infrastructure that the Hutt clan had built to maintain control and which now carried, in the most fundamental irony available to the universe, the instrument of that control's dissolution. In Mos Espa, a woman named Jira pressed her fingers to her wrist and felt silence where there had never been silence before, and sat down in the middle of her market stall and cried. In the spice mines of Kessel, in the processing facilities of Nar Shaddaa, in the agricultural compounds of Radia, in 17 other locations across 47 systems. Slave transmitters went dark in a cascade that followed the relay network's architecture, like a wave following the shape of a coastline, not all at once, but in a rolling progression that took 4 minutes and 22 seconds to complete, in which the constellations sensors tracked with the quiet thoroughness of a record being kept. On the bridge, nobody spoke until it was done. Then Kagan Jin, Jedi Master, veteran of 30 years of service to the Republic, a man who had seen the Force work in ways that defied every framework his training had given him, said very quietly, "The Force is with you, Shmi Skywalker." She didn't respond immediately. She was watching the sensor display, watching the Hutt fleet, which had frozen in its new formation with the characteristic quality of organizations whose operational premise has just been removed from beneath them. 23 ships hanging in orbit above Tatooine, suddenly uncertain what they were doing there. The boarding craft had stopped their approach entirely. Anakin returned to the bridge at a run and slid into the helm seat and looked at the view screen and felt the galaxy holding its breath. "They're not attacking," he said. "They're reassessing," Obi-Wan said. He was at the science station, pulling readings with the focused efficiency of a man who understood that the window between one phase of a conflict and the next was frequently the most dangerous interval. The Hutt clan's entire economic model in this region has just been structurally compromised. They're calculating losses, deciding whether attacking us makes the situation better or worse. "It makes it worse," Anakin said. "We have 47 photon torpedoes. They know that. They've known that since this morning." Kagan moved to stand beside the helm console, looking at the view screen. "But knowing it and accepting it are different things. They've been operating on the assumption that we wouldn't use them. That assumption is now under review." The comm system chimed. Not Jabba's wall of sound approach this time. A single, direct channel, tightly focused, directed specifically at the constellation's bridge frequency, which meant someone in the Hutt fleet had technology capable of identifying it, which was interesting information about Jabba's resources. "Incoming transmission," the computer said. Asterisk source, Hutt clan command vessel. Identified as asterisk a pause. Jabba Desaligic tour. Personal transmission. Everyone on the bridge exchanged glances. "Put him on," Anakin said. Jabba's face filled the view screen, vast, impassive, ancient in the way of things that have survived by consuming everything around them. His eyes were the color of old gold and contained about as much warmth. He looked at Anakin for a very long time without speaking, in the particular way of beings who use silence as a negotiating instrument. Anakin looked back at him with the patience of someone who had grown up under Watto and therefore understood that the performance of power was not the same thing as power. When Jabba spoke, it was in Huttese, which the computer translated in real time in clean text along the bottom of the view screen. "You have caused considerable disruption, little slave. The economic consequences of what you have done today will take years to calculate." "I know," Anakin said. "You cannot undo it." "I know that too." "Then you understand that you have made enemies today that do not forget and do not forgive." "I've always had enemies like that," Anakin said. "The difference is that today I have a starship." Something moved in Jabba's expression. Not quite respect. The Hutt concept of respect was thoroughly entangled with the concept of profitable relationship. And this situation had been spectacularly unprofitable, but something adjacent to it. The recognition one predator extended to another predator who had demonstrated genuine capability. "What do you want?" Jabba asked. Anakin had been thinking about this since before the broadcast. He had been thinking about it in engineering, with his hands in the comm array's guts, feeling the shape of the moment they were building toward. He had thought about what Kagan would want, what his mother would want, what the Force was pulling toward with the patient insistence of something that had been arranging this particular configuration for longer than any of them knew. "Safe passage," he said, "for this ship and everyone on it. Guaranteed. Not just out of this system, out of Hutt space. And in exchange," he paused, "we don't use the photon torpedoes." Jabba's eyes moved. The calculation behind them was almost visible. "And the freed slaves?" "Are free," Anakin said. "That's not a negotiating point." Another long silence. Then Jabba made a sound that the computer translated, with visible uncertainty about the appropriate cultural equivalent, as pragmatic. The Hutt fleet began to withdraw. Not quickly, nothing. Jabba did quickly if slowness preserved dignity, but definitively. One by one, the patrol craft peeled, away from their encirclement pattern and moved to higher orbit, and then to the outer system, and then to the edge of sensor range. The boarding craft returned to their carrier. The heavy transport from Gardella's fleet turned its damaged hull toward the jump point and limped away with the particular quality of something that has decided today is not its day. In 4 minutes, the constellation was alone in Tatooine's orbit, the planet turning beneath it in the twin sun light. The sensor display clear in every direction. Kagan released a breath he had been holding for the better part of an hour. Obi-Wan looked at the empty sensor display, then at Anakin, then at Shmi, then at his master, and said, "That negotiation will not hold indefinitely. The Hutt clan has resources and patience and a very long memory." "No," Kagan agreed. "It won't hold indefinitely." He looked at Anakin with the expression of a man arriving at a question he had been circling since the moment the transporter beam deposited him on this bridge, which means we need to discuss what comes next. Anakin leaned back in the helm seat and looked at the view screen, at Tatooine below, at the stars beyond, at the vast and patient dark that held everything he had ever known and everything he hadn't discovered yet. The Force moved through him like a tide that had finally found its shore. "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about that too." The conversation happened in the room the computer called the observation lounge. Anakin had found it during his engineering runs, a small chamber off the main corridor of Deck 2. Its entire outer wall a single curved viewport looking directly into space. No consoles, no tactical displays, no amber alerts. Just stars and the slow arc of Tatooine below, its desert surface catching the twin suns at an angle that made it look, briefly, like something precious. He had told the computer to direct everyone there when the Hutt fleet's last vessel cleared sensor range. And now they sat, Anakin and Shmi on one side of the central table, Kagan and Obi-Wan on the other, in the particular silence of people who have just survived something significant and are taking a moment to remember who they are before deciding who they will be. Shmi spoke first. "I want to understand what you're offering," she said to Kagan. "Not hostile. Precise." The voice of a woman who had learned that clarity at the beginning of conversations saved considerable pain at the end of them. Kagan folded his hands on the table. "The Jedi Order has traditions regarding the training of Force-sensitive children," he said. "Anakin's midi-chlorian count is unprecedented. The prophecy of the Chosen One, the being who will bring balance to the Force, describes someone of exactly his capacity. The Council will want to meet him. They will want to train him. And what does that mean in practice?" Shmi asked. "Traditionally," Obi-Wan said carefully, "it means the Padawan comes to Coruscant, to the temple. Training begins. Without his mother," Shmi said. A silence. "Traditionally, yes," Kagan said. He met her eyes without flinching. "But I want to be honest with you. The tradition exists because the Order has always believed that attachment to family, to place, to specific people, creates pathways to the dark side. Emotional bonds become fear. Fear becomes," he paused. "We have seen it happen." "I understand the theory," Shmi said. "I'm asking about Anakin specifically. Not about tradition. Not about other cases. About my son, in this specific situation, on this specific day." Kagan looked at Anakin. Anakin had been listening to this exchange with the focused stillness he brought to complex mechanical problems, identifying load-bearing components, understanding which elements were structural and which were circumstantial, finding the point where force applied correctly would resolve the tension rather than increase it. "Can I say something?" he asked. "Please," Kagan said. Anakin looked at his hands on the table, the hands that had flown the constellations, helmed for 16 hours, fixed a plasma conduit through force intuition, rebuilt a comm array in 38 minutes, felt the midi-chlorian signature of a Sith Lord from 20,000 kilometers and tried to offer him a way out. The hands that were attached to arms that were attached to a boy who had woken up this morning as a slave and was going to go to sleep tonight as something else, something that didn't have a word yet. "I've been feeling something all day," he said, "since the ship came. Actually, since before the ship came. I've been feeling it my whole life. But today it's clearer, like something that was always there. finally decided to stop being subtle about it. He looked at Kagan. The Force brought this ship here. Q did it, but Q doesn't do things without reasons. And the reason here is the Force. It arranged something. It arranged a specific outcome. He paused, feeling for the words with the same instinct he used for everything else. I don't think the Force brought me a starship and freed my mother and broadcast a signal across 47 systems so that I could go to Coruscant and sit in a temple and learn to not care about the people I love. Obi-Wan looked at the viewport. Kagan looked at Anakin for a very long time. No, he said finally, and the word carried the weight of a man releasing a framework he had carried for decades. I don't think it did either. Then what are you proposing? Obi-Wan asked, directing the question at Anakin, with the resigned openness of a Padawan who has learned that the universe frequently makes plans without consulting him. The ship stays, Anakin said. Mom stays, with me, on the ship, or wherever we decide to go. We don't belong to the Jedi Order. We don't belong to the Republic. We don't belong to anyone. He said the last word, with a quiet emphasis that contained the entire weight of his childhood. But we can work with you. The Force wants something balanced. I feel that clearly. I'm not supposed to serve one side of a conflict. I'm supposed to stand between them. Find the place where neither side can reach and do the work that neither side can do. That's a dangerous position, Obi-Wan said. All the positions are dangerous, Anakin said. I'd rather be dangerous in a way that's mine. Shmi looked at her son and felt something she had been holding in her chest since before dawn. Finally, carefully, release. Not tension exactly, more like the posture of someone who has been braced for impact for 9 years and has slowly, incrementally, become convinced that the impact has changed character, that what is coming is not the thing they armored themselves against. We'll come to Coruscant, she said. Anakin can meet the council. I want to understand who these people are and what they actually stand for, not what their traditions say they stand for. She looked at Kagan. And Anakin trains, but he trains as himself, not as a Padawan stripped of his history, not as a weapon, as a person who happens to be extraordinarily connected to the Force. Kagan bowed his head. I will advocate for exactly that before the council. Will they listen? Anakin asked. Some of them. Kagan smiled, the smile of a man who had been having the same argument with institutional authority his entire career and had found a particular peace with the fact that important arguments rarely resolved cleanly or quickly. Master Yoda listens more than he lets on. The Force speaks to him too. When he feels what you are, he shook his head slightly. He will know what I know. That tradition serves the Force, not the other way around. Obi-Wan had been quiet for several minutes, which was the state he occupied when thinking seriously. He looked up from whatever internal negotiation he'd been conducting. The signal we broadcast, he said. The slave transmitter neutralization. The Jedi Council will want to understand what happened in this system today. The political consequences across 47 systems will reach Coruscant before we do. Good, Shmi said simply. It will complicate. Good, she said again. Let it complicate things. Let them reckon with it. Let the Senate reckon with it. Let everyone who has been comfortable with the Outer Rim slave economy reckon with what a 9-year-old boy and his mother did from orbit above Tatooine with a ship that appeared from nowhere. She looked at the viewport, at the planet below. Someone should be uncomfortable. Kagan laughed, a genuine laugh, surprised out of him, warm and unguarded. Obi-Wan smiled despite himself. Anakin looked at his mother, with the expression he reserved for moments, when she exceeded even his considerable estimate of her. Later, after the conversation concluded and plans were made and the constellations, computer began calculating the most efficient route to Coruscant while simultaneously updating its crew. Manifest to read Skywalker, Shmi, First Officer. Skywalker, Anakin, Helm/Engineering in its records. Anakin went back to the observation lounge alone. He sat at the viewport and looked at Tatooine. He had grown up beneath those twin suns in a city that had used him as a component, and he had loved it anyway. Loved the engines and the dust and the way the heat sat on everything in the afternoon like a warm hand. He had loved it because it was what he had. He had not known, until today, what it felt like to have something more. His hand was whole. His mind was clear. The Force moved through him like a river that had found its channel, purposeful and unhurried, carrying something forward that he couldn't fully see but could feel completely. A future that branched away from darkness the way water branches away from stone, finding every available path toward light. He pressed his palm against the viewport, against the glass that separated him from the stars. "Thank you," he said quietly. To Q, perhaps. To the Force. To whatever combination of impossible things had conspired to place him here, in this moment, with his hands intact, and his mother free and 47 systems of people waking up to the first morning of their liberation. The stars did not respond. They simply continued being stars, ancient and certain and utterly unconcerned with the smallness of individual moments, which was fine because Anakin Skywalker had learned today that small moments were where everything important happened. He was 9 years old. He had never lost a hand. He had never made a choice from fear. He had never stood at the edge of darkness and felt it reach for him with the particular gravity of someone who believed they were offering him what he deserved. He did not know, sitting at the viewport above the desert world of his childhood, that this was the divergence point, the place where one version of his story ended and another began. He did not know about the Anakin Skywalker, who existed in the universe where this ship never came, where the transmitter never went silent, where a Jedi and a queen arrived on Tatooine and found a boy who was still, in the most fundamental sense, in chains. He only knew what he felt, and what he felt was possible. The desert world of Tatooine had never known mercy until the morning it did. What Q set in motion above that ochre planet was not a rescue in the conventional sense. There were no soldiers sent, no armies mobilized, no grand diplomatic intervention orchestrated through proper channels. There was simply a starship, placed with precision into the orbit of a world that needed something it had never been given, carrying within it the tools for two people to become exactly who the Force had always intended them to be. Anakin Skywalker grew into his power the way water fills a vessel, completely, naturally, without violence. He trained, eventually, under Qui-Gon Jinn, and then under Masters the Council assigned with the particular carefulness of people who had learned from Qui-Gon's persistent advocacy that rigid tradition and living force were not always the same thing. He trained with his mother present. He trained with his hands whole. He trained with the constellation in orbit above Coruscant like a second moon, patient and waiting, its Elkar's computer logging his progress with what any objective observer would have called pride. He never fell, not because he was untested. The darkness came for him, as it comes for everything bright, in forms expected and unexpected, wearing faces he loved and offering things he wanted. But he met it each time from a foundation that had not been hollowed out by loneliness and grief and the accumulated weight of loss piled onto a boy who deserved better. He met it as himself, whole, grounded, known. Shmi Skywalker became something the galaxy had no prior category for, a woman of no political office and no force, sensitivity and no institutional affiliation who nonetheless changed the economic architecture of the outer rim by existing in the right place at the right moment with her hands on the right console, and her heart already decided. The slave transmitter signal that propagated across 47 systems in 4 minutes and 22 seconds became known, in the years that followed, simply as the constellation pulse. Historians would write about it. Senators would argue about it. The Hutt clan would spend decades recalibrating around its consequences, rebuilding structures that had seemed permanent and now simply weren't. Darth Maul did not return to his master immediately. He sat at the edge of Tatooine's system for 11 hours before jumping to hyperspace. And where he went in those 11 hours, and what he decided during them, became a question that the Sith and the Jedi would spend years trying to answer. Palpatine's plans did not end. Darkness is patient and adaptive, and does not require any single instrument to achieve its purposes. But they became harder. The piece he had counted on, the beautiful, terrible, grief-forged weapon that a boy raised in chains and loss might become, was no longer available to him. The math of his long game changed in ways that would take him years to fully calculate. The Force, which had been holding its breath for a very long time, exhaled. and in the observation lounge of the USS Constellation, in orbit above a desert world that had never known mercy until the morning it did. A boy pressed his palm against the viewport and felt the stars looking back. May the Force be with you.